Stop acting all high and mighty just because you're pregnant. It's annoying that you can't even manage the housework.
My husband's attitude changed the moment I got pregnant. Before I got pregnant, Kevin was a cheerful and lively guy who constantly lifted my spirits. However, with the help of parents-in-law, I thought my husband's behavior had improved. Turns out that was just wishful thinking on my part. My name is Amy. Kevin and I are both working juggling household chores and jobs to make ends meet. He's a bit rough around the edges, but always upbeat and happy. Even when I'm down, he always finds a way to make me laugh. Sure, he sometimes lacks a read on social cues, but that's what I find endearing about him. Thanks to that, despite being busy with work and chores, I've been able to enjoy my days. One day, after several years of such a marriage, a welcome change came for both of us as a couple. I got pregnant and our family grew. We were thrilled when we found out and immediately went to share the news with our parents-in-law.
Amy, thank you so much. If you need any help or run into any issues, just say the word. We're here to support you, Emily told me.
It was a welcome offer, given that I was feeling a mix of happiness and some anxieties. Even my usually reserved father-in-law, George, promised to help, although he seemed a bit restless. While my parents-in-law and I were excited about the new addition to the family, Kevin was noticeably out of sorts ever since he learned about my pregnancy. When I told him, his reaction was flat.
Oh, you're pregnant? All right, got it.
It was an unexpectedly bland response from a man who's usually so cheerful and upbeat. He seemed reluctantly present during the announcement to my parents-in-law and hardly participated in the conversation. I chalked up his odd behavior to the sudden realization that he was going to be a father and was probably nervous about it. Moreover, I was so thrilled about being pregnant that I didn't pay much attention to his reaction. Even my mother-in-law, noticing his demeanor, said, "Isn't this your child too? Shouldn't you be happier?" But even she didn't seem too concerned. I believed that our excitement about having a child was the most important thing, and that Kevin's behavior was temporary. However, as the months rolled by, his attitude didn't improve. In fact, it became far worse than before my pregnancy. I've continued working after getting pregnant, but I tire more easily now. Sometimes I struggle with housework when I get home, which prompts comments from Kevin like, "What about dinner?"
Yeah, if I fail to have dinner ready when I come home, I get an earful.
If I fail to have dinner ready when he comes home, I get an earful.
So what if you're pregnant? You still have to do your job and the housework. It's terrible that you're using pregnancy as an excuse to slack off.
It's not ready yet? Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you can slack off on housework. You're really useless. Sometimes morning sickness is so bad that I have to skip work and chores. Yet my husband doesn't help around the house at all. This wasn't an issue before my pregnancy. Recently, though, it's rare for a day to pass without a complaint from him. The happiness and cheerfulness I used to feel have vanished. Now he's always in a bad mood at home, and I can't even remember the last time I saw him smile.
Why have you been so irritable since I got pregnant?
I questioned him about it, but he just snapped back.
What? I'm fine. You're the one messing things up.
Since then, he's completely shut down any conversation on the subject. To be fair, I'm not keeping up with the housework as much as I did before the pregnancy. But no matter how bad I feel, I'm doing the bare minimum. And the man I married wouldn't have raised his voice over something so small. Have I unknowingly done something to offend him? When I ask, he only gets angrier, and I still don't know why. As a result, we're talking less and less, and when he does speak to me, it's always to complain. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it was putting a serious strain on our marriage. The thought of bringing a child into this situation filled me with nothing but dread. I guess it showed on my face.
Amy, you've been looking down lately. What's going on?
These days, being at home means dealing with my husband's mood swings, so I often find refuge in my in-laws when I'm off work. When I tell my husband I'm going to his parents, he doesn't complain much, making it a good escape for me. I do feel guilty, but I have no other place where I can truly relax.
It's nothing serious.
I mustered a smile from my concerned mother-in-law and responded. My in-laws always welcome me into their home without a single grimace. How could I bring myself to tell them outright that their son is the reason for my troubles? I just couldn't do it. But my mother-in-law said, "We promised to help you when you announced your pregnancy, remember? You don't have to hold back." Maybe she sensed my smile was forced, because my mother-in-law held my hand and looked me in the eyes. Her gaze was earnest, letting me know she truly cared about me. Feeling the weight of her sincerity, I glanced at my father-in-law, who was watching from the side. He nodded in agreement, sharing the same concerned look as my mother-in-law. I couldn't hold back anymore in front of these two kind souls. Words began to pour out of me, venting my recent frustrations with my husband, my worries about having a child soon, and questioning if my husband would be a capable parent in his current state. My discontent with being criticized no matter what I do, and my confusion at how my husband has changed. Once I started, I couldn't stop myself from spilling everything that had been pent up inside me. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law listened to my tearful rant without interrupting. Tears flowed even more as I felt their kindness, and by the time I finished speaking, my face was drenched. I was a mess. After listening to my whole story, my mother-in-law said softly, "You've had it tough," and hugged me tightly. My father-in-law also placed his hand on my back, patting me gently. Finally, calming down in my mother-in-law's arms, she said, "We'll talk to Kevin. Just give us a moment." She picked up the phone and immediately called my husband. About an hour later, my husband arrived, clearly annoyed and clueless as to why he was summoned. My mother-in-law confronted him. "We've heard from Amy. What on earth are you doing?" After briefly explaining the situation, she gave him a piece of her mind. My father-in-law chimed in, pointing out that his current behavior was unacceptable, both as a husband and as a future father.
I'm sorry. I've been lost since we found out we were having a child. I didn't know what to do.
He finally apologized to me. If my parents-in-law are genuinely sorry, they should prove it through their actions, my husband assured me. He also promised to take better care of me and the kids from now on. To be honest, I was skeptical about the impact of mere words. My husband's demeanor softened noticeably after this incident. Not only that, but he even started taking the initiative to help with household chores. It might be small tasks like taking out the trash and washing dishes, but it's a huge relief nonetheless. The tension that used to fill our home disappeared, and finally, I felt at ease. I'm truly grateful to my parents and mom for helping us get back on track. One day when things were going well between us, I woke up feeling a bit tired from work the day before. Even the thought of making breakfast for both of us felt like a drag. Seeing my state, my husband said, "You had a tough day yesterday, right? You seem tired? I'll make breakfast." I was surprised by his offer. He's never been one to cook, not during our marriage or even when we were dating. "Really? That would be great, but are you sure?" Although his attitude had improved since the incident with my parents-in-law, I didn't expect him to cook.
It's no big deal, and started preparing breakfast in the kitchen.
A little while later, what he brought to the table was some slightly burnt scrambled eggs and toast, and a salad with noticeably unevenly cut vegetables.
Sorry, they're a bit burnt, he said with a slightly embarrassed smile.
I returned a smile to my husband, who was slightly embarrassed about his cooking. Sure, the meal didn't look particularly appetizing, but it was the thought that counted. Appetizing, but the fact that my husband took the effort to make it makes me happy. I really don't care about the appearance. We both quickly dig into our breakfast. While appreciating my husband's efforts, we eat quickly as we're pressed for time before work. Then, as I take a bite of the scrambled eggs he made, something feels off. It's a weird taste, unlike the ketchup or the eggs. I thought it might be a burnt part at first, but it's a flavor I've never experienced before. Is there something different about these scrambled eggs? They taste a bit off. I feel bad for questioning the dish my husband worked on, but I can't help but ask.
My husband says, "No, I just cooked them. Is something wrong?" In his usual tone.
After watching my husband leave for work, I thought maybe I was mistaken about the taste of the eggs. I was about to eat quickly and leave myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with the taste. Feeling guilty toward my husband, I decided to leave the scrambled eggs in the fridge and head to work. I thought I would try eating them again when I got home. If they still tasted strange, I'd let my husband know. With that in mind, I arrived at work and began my usual tasks. However, just a few hours into the workday, I started feeling sick. Could it be my usual morning sickness? I thought. I headed to the restroom a few times, but something felt different. Uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea set in, clearly worse than any morning sickness I'd had before. When I got up from my desk to speak to my boss, that's when it happened. I collapsed. I faintly hear my coworkers calling my name, but I lose consciousness. How much time has passed? I wake up in a hospital bed.
A doctor comes over as soon as my parents-in-law are at the bedside, notices I'm awake.
He lightly explains the situation and conducts some tests. Then he asks, "What did you eat today?" I tell the doctor that I ate the breakfast my husband made. I hadn't eaten anything else, so there's no mistake. The doctor turns pale and says, "Listen carefully. Our tests found a substance in your body that's not normally found in food. According to the doctor, it's a chemical found in herbicides. Even in small amounts, it can cause food poisoning, vomiting, and diarrhea. And it's in my body."
Are you sure you didn't eat anything other than the breakfast your husband made? Any other possibilities?
That's when I understood why the doctor had looked so pale. If I hadn't eaten anything else, it would mean my husband had intentionally poisoned our food with herbicide. The doctor must be considering other possibilities too. However, something clicked in my mind. The off taste I felt in the scrambled eggs this morning. It must have been the taste of herbicide.
The good news is it was a small amount this time, so the harm was minimal. It could have been dangerous for both you and the baby, though.
The doctor added this quietly, realizing that I had no other suspects apart from my husband's breakfast. My husband's breakfast. It meant that I could have unknowingly lost my child. Even my parents-in-law, who had been listening to the conversation, sensed the gravity of the situation and couldn't say a word. I checked on my husband's whereabouts. It seemed he already knew I was in the hospital and was on his way. At that moment, I shared a plan with my parents-in-law and the doctor and got their cooperation. Because I still needed to rest, I couldn't leave the hospital. Understanding the situation, both parents-in-law and the doctor agreed to cooperate. In less than an hour, my husband arrived.
I was shocked to hear you were in the hospital, Amy. Are you okay?
He looked relieved as he said this. However, I already knew he was the reason I was here. It only infuriated me more, so I confronted him directly.
Did you put herbicide in my breakfast? The tests found it. You realize this is your fault, right?
My husband looked shaken at my words. However, he tried to maintain his composure.
What are you talking about? Why would I do such a thing, especially to my pregnant wife?
His expression was so suspicious that it was more than enough for me to be convinced. However, it was still my subjective perspective, not objective evidence. But when I glared at him, he retorted,
What's your proof? You have none, right? Stop talking nonsense.
My husband seemed upset as he said that. You suspect me without any evidence? He looked at me as if to say just that. To him, I finally spoke up.
I didn't eat all of the breakfast this morning. The rest is still in our fridge. All we have to do is test it.
He must not have seen it coming. Up until a moment ago, despite his unease, my husband had a certain smugness on his face. That expression clearly shifted. His face turned pale, and he started to sweat profusely. After a moment of thought, he hurriedly said,
I don't need to visit anymore, okay? I just remembered I left something at work. I'm going home now.
He seemed ready to exit the hospital room. He's probably planning to go home and dispose of the leftover breakfast. But I've already taken steps to prevent that.
I had Emily submit the leftover breakfast to the police. They've been notified too.
Huh? Reported? He mumbled, looking stunned.
Just then, the sound of police sirens echoed from outside the hospital.
Looks like your ride's here. I'm sure they'll want to hear all about it. Off you go.
I watched as the arriving officers took my husband away. Later, he was arrested after a weed killer was found in the food he'd left at our home. According to his statement, he'd been having an affair and was planning to divorce me soon. But then my pregnancy came to light, and even his parents were thrilled. That changed the atmosphere, making it difficult to talk about divorce. So he thought if anything happened to our unborn child, he could blame it on me and get the divorce. Hearing this, both his parents and I were furious. I went to where he was detained and severed our familial ties. We divorced and I claimed compensation. It'll be a long time before he's released, but we've also gotten a restraining order against him for me and the child. A few months after my husband was arrested, I safely gave birth to a baby girl. I'm now raising her at my parents' home and regularly meeting with my in-laws. Every day I'm thankful for the miracle that is my daughter's life.